Hello, everyone. I'm Ken Podziba. I'm the president and CEO of Bike New York, and I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight for our February Spoke series entitled How We Ride, Cycling and Social Justice in the Black Community. Bike New York is a nonprofit organization that empowers New Yorkers to transform their lives and their communities through bicycling. And we accomplish this in many ways: free education programming, advocating for sustainable transportation, dynamic public events, expansive outreach, and collaboration with community and government organizations. And I'd like you to learn more about the work we do by going to bike.nyc/impact. Bike New York Spoke Series are virtual conversation events designed to bring together bike lovers, street users, and change makers for wide-ranging discussions that inform and inspire. And I have the pleasure of knowing Lena, and I have the pleasure of knowing Drew, and I'm sure you'll find tonight's Spoke Series enlightening and thought-provoking. And now I'd like to introduce our wonderful moderator, who also happens to be our Director of Community Outreach, Sharon Pope Marshall. Sharon?
Thank you so much, Ken, for that. Really appreciate it. I am honored and thrilled to have as our guest this evening, Andrew, founder of Good Company Bike Club, and also Lena, founder of Ride to DC. It is a pleasure to be with you both. Arguably, the year 2020 was a profound year for millions of Americans, and for you, Lena and Drew in particular. It was the year that produced, some would say, a cacophony of searing images that we saw over many, many months. And Black Lives Matter and institutional racism and structural racism became a part of our everyday lexicon. Yet in the midst of this profound time of disturbance for our nation, you, Drew, and Lena, you leaned into this tumultuous period, not shying away. You leaned into it, making the decision to get on your bikes and ride. I want to take this time for you, each of you, to share the pivotal moment or moments in 2020 that influenced your decision to engage your communities through biking. Your organizations were born in 2020. It's important to understand your thinking, your reactions to what was happening last year that made you decide that biking is what you needed to do, and political and social justice is how you needed to engage. And so I'd like to start with Lena to share with us what her reactions were that led her to uh, create the ride to DC. And also after Drew shares with us his experiences for 2020, we'll have the time to delve a little bit deeper into the ride to DC, as well as Good Company Bike Club. Lena?
Okay, thank you so much for the amazing introduction. And it is a pleasure to be here with you all to share the story of Ride to DC. Ride to DC actually started off in a photo. There is a photographer by the name of Mark Lennon who took a photo of me in early June. And from there, we started to just connect a little bit, and he shared a post about a march on Washington, which was occurring on the 28th of August, the second commitment march, the second march on Washington. And from there, at that moment was the beginning of this concept of cycling, this idea of biking to DC. At first, I had wanted to go to DC with some friends. I was going to rent a car with them and just, drive to DC. But then I thought to myself one day, what if I just bike to DC? It's a ridiculous idea, but what if? And from that moment on, that one dream, that one idea became something massive, and it brought 127 cyclists, a total of 140 people, New Yorkers from New York City to Washington, DC. And it's a true testament of the power that one dream and one idea has when you believe in it. So that is the origin story of Ride to DC.
Tell us a little bit more about the photo.
The photo was taken, I think, on the 4th of June, and it was taken at Cadman's Plaza in Brooklyn, where George Floyd's brother was actually making a speech. So there was a lot of media coverage at that time. And what was really interesting about the photo, and he wrote about it in a piece, and it's featured in NPR, there was a time where our eyes met, and it felt as if, we understood each other. There are times when you look at someone and you can understand. It was right after the speech, and it was a very emotional speech, and it was as if we were saying to each other, I see you and you see me, and we're in this space together. So that was our first moment of interacting. We don't talk often, barely, but with him sending me a random pamphlet, a Twitter post that caused this fire to begin. So that is the origin story of Ride to DC.
What made you go to that speech in the first place? And when you made that connection with the photographer,
Mm-hmm.
what did that connection say to you?
So that connection said that you are not alone in the emotions and the feelings that you're experiencing. That I hear you, that I see you, and that you exist, and that you matter. That was the emotions that I think we were both portraying. And the reason why we decided to go to DC is we wanted to, the purpose of Ride to DC is to make sure that we are creating a space where anyone who enters can feel a sense of belonging. We as human beings we have this urge to feel as if we belong to a community. And at times, there are a lot of people of color specifically that have this feeling that we do not belong. And so if there are spaces that are not available for us, where we constantly feel like we have to assimilate and we have to fit into this box, we can never feel like we belong. So instead of, finding spaces, I decided to create a space. And I don't think I'm alone in this experience. I think a lot of groups and organizations came out this past year that decided, you know what, I'm going to take matters to my own hands. I'm not going to go out and look for acceptance. Instead, I'm going to create a space where I feel like I belong, mm-hmm. and where I can create a space for others too. And so Ride to DC, one of our main mission statements is to create a community of cyclists where anyone who enters can feel a sense of belonging, has a feeling of family. And outside of that, we have other missions and visions.
So expanding on creating space, that's a good segue, because you're absolutely right. Many others, they decided that I'm going to create this space. And Drew, I think that's exactly what you did. You created that space. were there pivotal moments in 2020 that impacted you, that made you decide that you were going to create that space?
Hello everyone. Good evening or good afternoon. I got in the world, different parts of the country. Again, Andrew Bennett, but I do go by Drew, and I'm the founder and CEO of Good Co Bike Club. And I wish I had the foresight, like Alina had, to say that I wanted to start the bike club, but it just actually kind of happened. So my story is a little bit different, where I've been a cyclist my entire life, and I've always had a bike, always loved cycling and enjoyed it. And initially, there was like a core group of maybe 5 of my friends that I sent a text message out, hey, I want to go on a ride. And particularly now during COVID, I haven't seen my friends in weeks, months. And, once outside opened up a little bit where we could start doing safe cycles, me and one of my friends would kind of go on like long rides just to see each other, just have kind of some type of human interaction. So then one day in May, there's like restaurants kind of open back up for like street dining. And I just put on my Instagram story, if anybody wants to ride with me tomorrow at 12 o'clock, meet me at Brooklyn Museum, no flyer or anything like that, just did a post. And 17 people showed up. And it was like, friends that I would see every day that I haven't seen in months, just able to see each other, the fake social distance hug and everything like that. And, we had a great time. I took them to a taco spot that I know about. Instagram story got a lot of traction, people having a good time. And everyone was just so thankful to be outside the house that everybody said, Drew, we got to do this again next week. And everybody on my story, yo, Drew, next time we do this ride, let us know. So again, the next week, again, I didn't make a flyer or anything. I just said, you want to meet me at the museum? Meet me here at 12 o'clock. And then 34 people showed up. And I planned the route in advance, took them to a nice waterfront, showed them different parts of the city that most people don't get to explore, because a lot of us live in central Brooklyn. And if you work in Manhattan, we kind of have one path. So kind of showed them another side of Brooklyn by Red Hook. I took them to a waterfront. And then, like everybody was just texting me like, Drew, like we had so much fun, got to do this again, make it official. So that's then when I kind of started thinking about the impact that we could have. And I made the Instagram page, Good Co Bike Club, because for me, I was thinking about the experience and thinking about the people that showed up. It wasn't necessarily about the biking. It was about the people and an opportunity to safely social distance, to explore Brooklyn, to explore New York City. And along the routes, I always try to make sure we stop at a local Black or minority-owned business to try to support them as well. Because of course, during the pandemic, a lot of places shut down and some of our favorite restaurants and establishments were struggling. So why you could bring some of our dollars to support those companies and establishments as well. So all that being thought about is how I came up with the name Good Co Bike Club. And we made the Instagram page on June 5th, which is obviously, Alina mentioned, right after George Floyd's death. And a lot of people were protesting on bikes, and a lot of people were just looking to cycling as a way to safely social distance, a great way to, meditate while you ride, a great way to get exercise because the gyms are closed. So it was the perfect, culmination of everything that we needed to get through the pandemic at a time where we were all struggling, just looking to get outside the house. So that's how the page started. And what really got us motivated was doing the Juneteenth ride. This year, again, everybody's a little bit more aware of, social justice and diversity and what it means to, be in America as a Black American. So doing the Juneteenth ride, which was on a Friday, perfect day, perfect weather. The Brooklyn Borough President's Office got involved. We're on Channel 11 News, and everyone was just looking for something to do. And getting on a bicycle was the best way to. It's a very freeing experience. So we called it a freedom ride. You got on our bikes and we rode about 17 miles. And it was just a free ride. Like, it wasn't about protesting. It wasn't about disrupting traffic. It was just about being like a big kid again, being on your bike and just being able to ride. We rode to the beach and then rode to the park, and it was able to, again, safely social distance. And then since then, we've been doing weekly rides, exploring New York City, exploring the 5 boroughs, even rode out to Jersey. We didn't make it to DC yet, but we did ride to Jersey. And that's what we are in a nutshell. You do weekly rides, and we always try to support businesses on our rides also.
So on your page, on your Facebook page,
Right.
there's a lot about supporting Black-owned businesses. How did you make the leap from getting together with friends to also making the bike rides a core part of the route to support Black-owned businesses?
Yeah, so I'm formerly a part of the restaurant industry. I used to bartend and serve, so, and I'm also from Brooklyn, so I know a lot of different establishments. And just seeing on social media, oh, this spot closed. I used to go there every week. Another spot closed down. I have a friend who's the owner of 333. It's a popular lounge in Brooklyn, and I said, we can stop by on the route just because that's my friend. And he was just so overwhelmed and thankful because foot traffic was the foot traffic has decreased a lot. And as we would just stop at different restaurants, that's the overwhelming thankfulness that they had. It really spoke to me. And I wanted to make sure that's part of our values, to make sure we continue to do that and support our community in the time of need.
Mhm. Lena, wow, biking to DC, and that was done in such a short period of time. I mean, how many months from beginning to end, or how many weeks from beginning to end did it take to organize something on that level? And why the commitment march? Why Washington, DC? Why the commitment march?
Yes, so it took, to answer the first part of the question, I made my first interest post on the 25th of June, so near the end of June. And it wasn't until the first or second week of July that my team and I, actually decided to plan for the ride to DC, which started on the 22nd of August. So we had less than 2 months to plan a 6-day bike tour. And I am so grateful for the team that was in full support. We were working 24/7 to plan this life-changing and life-transforming event. And this experience and the journey, a lot of people will tell you, including myself, that it has changed lives and transformed lives in an extremely positive way. And we decided to go
In what way?
I'm sorry?
In what way?
It has, cycling has so many, it benefits. When you think about biking 300 plus miles, there are even people who did 350 plus miles and 15,000 feet in elevation, most of that being in the second half of the ride itself. It's mentally challenging. It's a mental challenge, having to push yourself to many different levels, right? It was also transforming in a way where you're seeing the world. I think someone had put something in the comment box earlier about seeing the world differently on a bike compared to, driving, which is mostly on a highway, right? You get to see what life or how people live life outside of this concrete jungle, which then expands your knowledge and experience of life, which then changes how you view it, right? We also focused on community building and engagement. So we had 127 riders, but we divided people into pods of 10 to 15. And each pod, and it's really interesting to see this because I was able to hop to different pods. Each pod had its own wavelength, its own way of moving and interacting with one another, its own culture in a sense. And it's amazing to see people moving beyond this concept of, this box of race, class, religion, gender, and just to see each other as human beings, as individuals who are going through the same struggle and going through the same journey from beginning to end. And then at the end, you participate in a historic moment, which is the second ever March on Washington, where you get to see the offsprings of MLK speaking and just saying something simple, which is give us the same rights, treat us the same or is equally as others, and give us the same rights, and so on. But it's such a beautiful and impactful moment. Anyone who, I'm not going to say this is the experience of all, but at least for myself, it is difficult to say that I did not leave differently I left differently. And I think most people did too.
Was your group that went diverse racially?
Yes. So about almost 40% of the riders are identified as with the pronoun she, her. And we're still gathering data, but I would say close to 40% were minority, which is larger than most average cycling groups. Our focus is to create a culture where instead of assimilating, we want a culture that acculturates. So instead of having to feel as if you want to fit in to the majority, we want to create a space where every culture is respected, where every person is respected. So integration, but integration in an equitable way is what we are looking for as an organization.
Okay. Drew, you go through Black neighborhoods, white neighborhoods. What has been the reception as well as the perception of a large cycling group en masse going through some communities here in New York City? Oh, you're muted.
There we go. I had to get permission to unmute. So Helena's had a lot of the points on the head that if I could just elaborate for a little bit, just thinking about the lack of representation in cycling. And, one thing I realized from the very beginning is when you just Google the word cyclist, everything, if you go to images, it's a lot of older, white men. There's not a lot of women representation, definitely not a lot of people of color representation. So that's one thing that we like to promote is diversity in cycling. And to your point, as far as biking in different neighborhoods, I realized that, I'm from Brownsville, New York. I don't know if anybody's from New York, but shout out to Brooklyn. In Brownsville, there's definitely not a lot of bike lanes, not a lot of cycle shops. There's not a lot of access to cycling resources. My street, once I come out, is very bumpy. And when you get to Park Slope, when you get to Williamsburg, when you get to, Bensonhurst, some of those other neighborhoods, the bike lanes are clear, they're wide, there's signaling for cyclists, and it's just like, oh wow, other neighborhoods have really, gotten to the Department of Transportation to have better cycle resources. So one ride that we did in particular that I was proud of is on August 1st, we did a ride called We Bike Too, just to, raise awareness that, we bike too, and cycling shouldn't be reserved for a particular race or class. And I would love it for, all across the 5 boroughs we'd have the equitable access to cycling. And you keep talking about social justice, and it's not, social justice isn't diversity. They often group it together. Social justice is equal access and equitable resources across the board. So that's one thing I like to promote. And I hope that we could promote in Good Code Bike Club is equity across the board. And to your question, to answer as far as biking in different neighborhoods, it's always funny because as soon as we get on our bikes, people think we're protesting. And, once we start riding, it's, yeah, Black Lives Matter. I'm like, yep, every day. You don't got to tell me. Like I live in the skin, I can't code switch. I can't, leave my skin at home. So every day I know Black Lives Matter, but today I'm just riding my bike, and I appreciate the support. I appreciate when people chant, but, I just want to enjoy riding, and when we do our freedom rides, our bike fets, and our day-to-day rides, it's like protesting is very important. I don't ever want to take anything away from it, but sometimes I just want to live without having that burden on my shoulder. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about cycling for me is it's fun. Like I remember learning how to ride a bike, and that's one thing we did as kids is just got on our bikes. Bike lives matter, exactly. And if you couldn't, if you didn't have money for a vacation, if you didn't have money for a video game system, there's always your bike. And if you get on your bike, ride on the block, and that's one of the most fun experiences I could think about as an adult. That I can't fly yet, so I could ride my bike in the meantime. So that's something that we like to promote, is just a fun, freeing experience. We can get on our bikes, again, safely social distance, and just enjoy our neighborhood. You're on mute right now.
Okay, so what was your initial introduction to biking, Drew?
Yeah. My initial bike, like as a child.
Yeah, yeah, as
Yeah,
a
it was,
child.
I remember when I moved into the neighborhood, we had a Randy, like a old hand-me-down bike that everybody used in the house, at least my siblings anyway. Excuse me. And my neighbor taught me how to ride a bike. And yeah, and I've just always enjoyed it since. And I used to go to summer camp as a kid, and we just always try to find bikes to get around because, as Lena mentioned earlier, when you're in a car, you kind of get tunnel vision. But when you're on a bike, you can get further. You could kind of explore, look around. So for me, it was when I was a child, about 7 years old, with my first bike.
How about you, Lena?
Yeah, I actually started riding in Ethiopia. My dad worked for, I think it's World Vision, and my father is here, so he can correct me. But he worked for an international company that allowed him to travel, and he was able to bring a bike to Ethiopia, which is rare, which was rare at that time. I'm not quite sure what it's like now. So I was able to learn how to ride a bike at a very young age. And then when we moved to Michigan, my dad used cycling as a way to, engage with his kids, to build a relationship with his kids. So we used to bike together to the ice cream store, the local ice cream store, and whatnot. And I didn't really become a cyclist until undergrad.
So what about this idea of linking cycling with social justice issues? Do you think that there'll be more biking organizations or cycling organizations that are going to want to do the same thing? We have a lot now. Do you think there'll be more, or as time goes on, is this something that's going to become less and less important?
Um, I think that there will definitely be more. I think the goal for both Andrew and I, please correct me if I'm wrong, is just to get more people on bikes. Even Bike New York has that same vision. Every New Yorker has access to a bike, right? We're fighting the same fight. Our methods might be slightly different, but we want the same end goal. And I think, going back to what Drew said earlier about representation, I think it's important that we start that we start representing more BIPOCs, or Black, Indigenous, people of color, um, in every aspect of cycling until it becomes a norm, right? Patterns make us who we are today. That's my personal view. So the more we see BIPOCs on social media, on TV, and the more that's repeated to us, it becomes normal. And I think we need to get to a point that cycling is a normal activity, and that cycling it should not have any bias, and it should not have preferences, and anyone can be a cyclist. Anyone should have access to a bike, and everyone should be treated equally on a bike. So
So
Just if I
let's
add on, if I
go
could add
ahead, Drew.
real quick, 1 second. Yeah, it's just
Mhm.
thinking about. I think biking is, and I didn't coin this phrase, but biking will save the world. I really do think that biking has the potential to save the world, and everything about cycling I love. And
yeah,
one of the main things that actually kept me going in the beginning, when people really give these testimonials about how just it's improved their mental health, because you're not necessarily talking with people when you're riding, but you're still around people, and you still get that sense of camaraderie. You're riding, so you're exercising, so it's improving your mental health, your physical health. Um, Again, you're able to be around people, so it's helping out with social anxiety, and just again, it's fun. So you're like checking all the boxes, and I think social justice is just about that. It's like, if you don't, I don't have money for a therapist, but so many people gave good credit for helping their mental health and saving their life during the pandemic. So it just checks all the boxes, and it's not just about protesting. And I'm glad we didn't lead with that, because you can do that on a bike, but everything else about biking just helps your overall wellness. So I'm glad that she touched on all those points.
Yeah, so if you had the ear of the new DOT commissioner, what would you ask him in terms of the needs of underserved communities, of communities that don't have the cycling infrastructure that you pointed out earlier? What would you say to him?
I would say that that we bike too, and to not only devote cycle resources to affluent neighborhoods, but we should improve bike lanes in all neighborhoods. You should. I'm a big advocate of city bike and bike sharing, and we all know if you look at a map that they're particular to certain neighborhoods. If you look at the bike lane map, again particular to certain neighborhoods. Bicycle shops. Again, you can't really control people open up bicycle shops, but you could create grants and encourage that to kind of spread beyond just the inner city. And we all know what neighborhoods those are, and those are the more affluent neighborhoods. So I would just hope to encourage him or her to look to expand cycle resources.
And by the way, I'm just going to do this shameless plug. Speaking of bike shops, Bike New York has a bike shop on Fulton Street, Recycle a Bicycle. So if anybody is looking for a bike and needs one, we have one, 848 Fulton Street. What about you, Lena? What would you say to the commissioner of DOT in terms of, what underserved communities need, what certain communities need for more bike infrastructure?
Yes, I will start off by saying I completely agree with Andrew. There needs to be more bike sharing programs available. As an educator, I want every school to have a bike lane, or to have bike lanes that, point to schools, so that my student in the Bronx doesn't have to wait 1 hour to get on a BX12 bus, right? They can just bike to school and it'll take less time, rather than going from one side of the Bronx all the way to the other side and have only one option, or one option as like a form of transportation. So a bike sharing program, bike lanes that go directly to schools would be my two, areas of focus.
Okay. Drew, you mentioned earlier that if you just did a Google search of cyclists, there would be a certain type of cyclist. How could traditional cycling organizations be more inclusive of people of color?
I think overall it's about representation, and when you see people who look like you do certain things, that opens up your mind to oh, I could do that too. So I think it's being intentional about who you hire. It's intentional about who you have on staff. It's getting more people that are diverse to get on a bicycle. So it really boils down to representation, really. And one thing that, again, that I'm proud, I guess, about with Goodco, and I saw somebody write this question as far as represent, like, who represents your organization. And Goodco, we're about 50-50 split when it comes to gender split, which is definitely not unique to most cycle organizations. And we're probably about 98%, people of color. We are open to all cyclists, but just because of how we started, a lot of Black and brown folk have gravitated towards Goodco, but we are open for everybody to join. And with that, as we ride through the communities, I think more people are starting to get on the bike. And I don't have the exact data on this, but I would probably say 6 out of 10 of our riders are new riders, like they just got a bike within this past year. So it's like, oh, wow, I didn't know this was a popular thing. I didn't know we did this. And we do bike, so it boils down to representation and being intentional about who's at the table.
Mm-hmm. Lena, in terms of your efforts to bike from New York to DC, do you think that there should be more touring organizations, bike touring organizations that are geared toward people of color, or that are more diverse, particularly in where they go, for example?
Yes, the simple answer is yes, of course. I think there should be more bike touring Organizations that do focus on the underserved and underprivileged population. There is so much power when you are on a bike, and so much freedom that one can get. I personally use cycling as my escape, as my form of meditation, as my way of releasing any negative emotions that I may be feeling, and as also as a way of inspiration. And I love to bring this topic every once in a while. But the idea of Cliff Bar, the one that we eat every day, started on a very long bike ride. And it's interesting to see that and to hear that story, and then to wonder, because I always think about, I call them my kids, but they're my students, but I think about my students and I wonder, what if they had that same access to a bike where they can use that as their way of escaping? They can use that as their form of meditation. They could use that as their form of inspiration. What ideas could spring to their minds if they had that access and went on a very long bike ride? So I do believe that we need to have more organizations like Good Co, more organizations like Right to DC, MBR, and so on, that are providing people the opportunity to be free, both mentally and physically and emotionally.
Okay, Drew.
I think she hit the nail on the head. I actually don't have anything to add. I don't think
So
that.
let me ask the reverse question. And this is a question that one of the registrants wanted to know. And essentially what this person asked was, is there a way that whites could support Black bike companies, can support Black bike clubs? Is there a space where whites can participate and be helpful as well?
Yeah, 100%. As I mentioned, while our group is primarily comprised of Black and brown individuals, we are 100% open to anybody joining. I think it's the willingness to want to join. That's the thing. That's the first step, but not necessarily like, how can I phrase this? It's understanding that it's to not try to monopolize or take over a space when you join. I think that's something that I would just give people a heads up on, and to know that that's not your space to come in and dictate what's going on. I think how you serve as an ally is by listening, and the willingness to join, and then you listen and then participate. So I think that's how you're our ally in any space. So if you like to ride with Good Co, by all means, it's not a race or a gender or requirement to ride with Good Co. But continue to support with dollars. We have merchandise by sharing our pages on Instagram, by telling friends about it. I think that's always to support, regardless of what your race or gender is. I think it's, yeah, that's my answer.
Lena, are you planning a trip this summer? Are you planning to ride this summer?
Yes, we are currently in the planning stages of Right to DC 2021.
Okay, all right. And when are you going to start recruiting around that, for that?
You can keep an eye on our Instagram page and our website. Our Instagram is Right to DC. Website is righttodc.com. And we will be announcing that.
Okay, and Lena, where do you see this eventually going overall in terms of Ride to DC? How do you see it evolving?
My goal as a teacher, I'm always talking about my students, not my kids, but they are my kids for the first 8 hours of my day. But for my students, I want them to be able to experience the ride to DC, the journey that it takes. and the benefits that a ride like Ride to DC has to offer. So my personal goal for Ride to DC is to have a program set for high school students, a training program that not only involves, the physical aspect of it, but the mental and emotional aspect of Ride to DC, so that they have access and they are able to complete the Ride to DC. I want the organization, and I think that this is the vision and mission of who we are as an organization. It would be amazing if we were able to have an extremely diverse and integrated community that respected each other as human beings, where we can look beyond the status quo or the things that we are told matter and see each other as human, as people that we can build relationships with, as individuals. So that is individuals that also love this one amazing thing, which is biking and cycling. And so that is a goal that we have with Ride to DC.
Okay.
Yes.
And Drew, how do you see GoodCo evolving?
Wow, sky's the limit. I have so many ideas. How much time do I have? But as you've been talking about, I would love to be able to get a bike in everybody's hand. But as I was sitting there thinking, I'm like, the main reason why a lot of my friends didn't have bikes growing up, even when I work in the education system also, and I did a ride. I actually collaborated with Bike New York, and we used the bike library to everybody to access the bike. And a lot of people didn't have bikes. You can't fit 3 bikes in a 2-bedroom apartment or a 1-bedroom apartment. A lot of us grew up in 7 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. Where you keeping these bikes? So I never had a new bike. I've had a lot of hand-me-downs, and some get stolen and get a new bike somehow. But I would love to work with Brownsville Recreational Center or different community centers where we could have a bike library and just increase bike libraries around the neighborhood where young adults, children, even older adults could have access to bicycles. One thing that I pride myself and I love about GoodCo is we're more than just a bike club. We are a social lifestyle brand, and people come to GoodCo not just to ride, but to socialize, to safely social distance, to support local establishments, to have fun on the ride. And the commonality, obviously, bicycles, because you're always biking, but we have a lot of other components. So we have the wellness component. We support one another's business. We talk about stocks in one of our channels. We support each other. This past weekend, 5 members in the chat went on a ski trip. I didn't get an invite, by the way, but I saw them. They went out and they had a good time. So we're becoming more than just a bike club. We are an extended family, and as we are a social club, I would love to see us, eventually get a location where we could, have a GoodCo bike club establishment, smoothies, mental health services, community resources going on, et cetera, et cetera. So sky's the limit with it. As you are right now, as a smaller organization, I could definitely see an expanding to that, maybe expand from city to city. But right now we are Brooklyn based, and hopefully as we're able to continue fundraising, different doors are open.
Fantastic. Do we have any questions from the chat? Any questions that were in the chat? Either
Sharon, this is
Yeah.
Rich.
Okay.
The chat is huge. What I would suggest is people could put questions in right now at the bottom, or we
Okay.
could unmute everybody, or at least let them unmute themselves. I can do that in the security function so that they can ask questions verbally if they want. Let me know what you think.
Let's put it in the chat.
Okay, if you
Maybe-
could, everybody put, because right now the chat is at like 175 messages and I am having trouble scrolling through them all. So
Okay.
if people could put questions now in the chat, we'll get to them.
So I just see one that came through about using routing apps for your rides. I've been hearing about a lot. Right now, I've just been kind of using Google Maps. I know it's probably not the best one. I forgot the last one somebody just told me about, but I've been using Google Maps just because of, I think Google Maps is really convenient and I could kind of star places that we've gone. But I haven't, if you have any suggestions, I'll be open to exploring different ones. I just personally like Google Maps, personally. Have you had any interactions with police?
So,
Oh, okay.
Rich, did you pick up any questions, or I have some additional questions?
Ride with GPS, that is it, yep.
Sorry, I'm muted. There are some questions coming in. Do you want me to pick ones out, or do you want to look at the chat?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you can.
Gosh, so many questions coming in here.
Okay,
Here's one from Teddy. Well, okay. Let me scroll down a little bit.
So, okay, so I'll jump in with a question. So car culture is very ingrained in our communities. And I know that it's really important to see more cyclists, because if you see more cyclists, you see more cyclists of color, you can better vision yourself riding as well. Is there anything else we need to be doing to move away from our dependence on cars overall? It could be either Lena or Drew.
Yeah, I think that we're very social people, and I think once people start seeing that it's more socially acceptable to do, it'll definitely start to pick up. I think with the pandemic, it naturally drove people away from public transportation. So I took the train 5 to 6 days out the week, and I probably took the train once all summer. And I could have, but I'd get dressed up and I'd take my bike instead, just because that was a culture now, the thing to do. And I think once that becomes a little bit more of a social norm, I think people definitely start to lean towards it more. Yeah.
Okay. Lena?
Yes, the question was.
Yeah, and especially from your perspective as a teacher, how do we how do we have people become less reliant on cars? And obviously it's seeing more people on bikes. Is there anything else that you can do, because you're also working with these kids, and you see their growing fascination with cars and wanting to get cars. How do you do battle with that, given your enthusiasm for biking?
Yes. I will start off by saying, in the beginning of the year, before my students knew, I don't think a lot of my students actually know what I do outside of work. They see me as a teacher and probably nothing else. But there were a few students, a few sophomores, that had mentioned how they actually started riding their bikes over the summer because they couldn't use the train. They didn't have any other form of transportation. So it's really interesting. But in order to get more people on bikes, you need to be able to provide the access of not only a bike, but everything else that comes with riding a bike, like a helmet, which costs a lot of money. You'll have to have proper gear, right? And bibs are expensive. They are very expensive. So it's not just giving someone a bike, but there's also so much more that they need in order to be able to ride a bike. Not that you need a bib to, go to the corner store or anything like that, but we have to keep in mind that just by giving a bike doesn't mean, it means a lot, but there's still so much more work that goes behind, that comes after it. So for my kids, I do envision every single one of them having access to a bike. But before you provide that access, one needs to think about everything else that they'll need, like a lock, like proper pants, like proper gear, and so on.
Okay,
If I could say two things that the chat was
sure.
mentioned as far as a few people mentioned NYPD, and then I think it was Alan who mentioned the social stigma between being Black and riding a bike. And I spoke about this a lot. I didn't come up today, but I remember my first bike that I bought when I moved back to New York. I bought it in 2014, and I have a basket on it, right? And every time I rode that bike, people make fun of me. Oh, you got a basket on your bike. You don't got a car. You don't know how to drive. I know how to drive. I had a car. I just like to bike. And I think there was, for whatever reason, in the Black community, there was definitely a stigma against being a grown man on a bike. You know, it's like you're a grown man on a bike. It's like, that must mean you have no money, and riding bikes are for white people. So there was definitely a social stigma against that I'm trying to break, because now everybody wants a bike, and now it's cool to ride a bike.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that was super annoying. And that as that is changing, I think more people will definitely get on bikes. And then two, somebody mentioned NYPD, and again, so back in the day, in the 90s, not even back in the day, it still happens now where we're socially, racially profiled, but more so in the 90s, like there were a lot of young Black men that were stopped on bikes, and that caused a lot of like tickets and things like that within the Black community. But if you look at the disparity between people who get tickets on a bike, it's definitely leaned way more towards young Black brown boys. So that is something that we worked with, hopefully could start a conversation with the police to try to not racially profile or stop young men on bikes. I don't think that deters people from riding a bike, but it is something that we all are trying to fight against.
So how do you do that then? I mean, you know that this could be a potential problem. So is there any advice or suggestions?
Yeah, it's working with community leaders. Every precinct at NYC has a community outreach office. It's not community outreach, it's community liaison. I forgot the exact name of it, but every NYPD precinct has an office there. And we work closely with the 6-7 precinct. Actually, two of my cousins are cops, and they both ride with us. So community affairs, there we go. When we did the bike fit, that was the 7-7 precinct, and they came out, so we work very collaboratively with NYPD. And it's also interesting that now that I'm on this topic, is a lot of times when we're riding and the cops are there, people will try to block the cops from being with us. And it's like, no, we invited them. Like, this is not a protest. Like, it's a community. We're in this together. I understand the nature of sometimes NYPD and communities of color, but we're about unification. And at any given moment, actually, one of our captains are a cop too. So at any given moment, there's probably a cop with us. And it's about unifying the community. Of course, we're against police brutality, but that doesn't mean we're against cops, So cops ride with us.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you. We often invite them to our rides because we want the community to see them with us together. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Drew, I love that suggestion. Each of the precincts have community councils, monthly community councils. And it's a great place to start, particularly if you're leading rides and leading group rides, just to give them a heads up and let them know what's going on. And you get to establish that relationship. So that I think that overall, that's really important to do. One last question, and then we're going to be wrapping this up. So, what's a fun factoid that you want us to know about Drew, that you want us to know about Lena, that you can share about yourself?
Well, myself, I like hats.
I don't know how it is that you got to that conclusion. Oh, wow.
Fun fact, I have lots of fun facts, but I love to travel. Every year I try to hit at least 4 different countries when traveling is allowed. And I've been skydiving. Like, I'm looking at a skydiving picture right now. So that's my fun fact. Is I travel and I've been skydiving.
Okay, great, fantastic. Didn't know anything about your hats, though.
No, I would have never guessed.
Same here, same here. Same here. How about you, Lena?
Yes, well, I will start off by saying, fun fact, I will never go skydiving. That is way too risky. I love my life. I appreciate it so much. I will stay. I want my 2 feet to be touching the ground, a floor of some sort. But in all seriousness, a few fun facts about me is that I do enjoy being creative. I'm not the greatest artist or musician, but I do love to paint every once in a while. I paint Afro women with Afro or Afro queens. I enjoy making music, and it is a fun activity for me. It's also my other way of just, releasing and escaping, as always. And I love to talk about race and politics. It is something I'm very passionate about. And I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours. And most of my friends and my family know this about me. So those are a few fun facts.
And a shout out to your parents.
Thank you. They're in this chat, Tabeba and Azabe. Hello. My dad is waving. Another fun fact. In Ethiopia, your last name is your father's first name. So my last name is Tabeba. My father's first name is Tabeba. His last name is his father's first name.
Nice. Good to know.
Good to know indeed.
Yeah, totally. Wow, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you, Lena and Drew. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So I see people asking about Good Co. You can find us on Instagram. It's at Good Co Bike Club. I'll just type it in chat also. And we also have a website, goodcobikeclub.com. I'll put my contact information, and feel free to reach out with any questions if you're looking forward to joining for a ride. Ride schedule will be up soon. We have some save the dates on the Instagram as well. So if you want to keep in touch, I'll put that information in.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Appreciate the generosity of your time, Drew, and the generosity of your time, Lena. New York City in general and our biking community in particular have benefited tremendously by the depth of your passion and by the impact of your commitment to inclusivity as well as activism. I hope everybody, as Drew mentioned, I hope everybody will check the chat, definitely join and participate and go on their rides. I'd like to thank our audience for supporting Bike New York. Your attendance tonight means so much to us. Consider helping to sustain our free bike education programs and events like this one. We are grateful for any level of support because that means that we're heading in the right direction with you. So see you next week. This is not goodbye, but see you next week, March 1st. We're having the New York City Mayor's Candidates Town Hall Forum, and we've got everybody. Eric Adams, Sean Donovan, Catherine Garcia, Ray McGuire, Scott Stringer, Andrew Yang. I was about to say Andrew Yang, and many, many others. So everybody, I want you to continue to be well and safe. Wear your mask, social distance, and wash your hands often. See you next time, everybody. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Lena.
Thank you for having us.
Bye.
It's a
For having
pleasure.
us.